Welcome. My name is Chris Gassman, and I am the Senior Associate Director here at the Center for Sustainable Business, which is a strategy hub and member-based center at the University of Pittsburgh with the goal of galvanizing businesses to thrive for all. I'm very excited to bring together our panelists today for an honest conversation about the wicked problems facing the workforce today. Why wicked problems? For the researcher and the entrepreneur, it helps us home in on the problems we don't know the answers to yet. For those in industry, it helps surface how we might start solving these questions together. This is one of many upcoming thought leadership events for the CSB to help catalyze your sustainability goals, including an official side event at the Global Clean Energy Action Forum on September 2nd at 3 p.m. The Fall Sustainable Business Forum for member companies on October 19th and 20th, and an ESG Rosetta Stone strategy primer on November 29th, as well as senior leader interviews in our podcast, Sustaining Sustainability, which you can listen to on your favorite podcast app or subscribe via the link that our team will drop in the chat. Finally, just to make the consultants free, you can get a synthesis of each of these in our newsletter, which will also drop a link for in the chat. Now, the CSB has 3 thematic work streams, one of them being Workforce 100%, with the goal of helping companies create strategies they need for their workforces to be representative of 100% of their communities, for 100% of those roles to be thriving work, and to cover 100% of the workforce. So we're not just looking at full-time folks, we're thinking very holistically about the part-time folks, about the gig worker, the contractor, the supplier, because as we've seen over these past 2-3 years, when any of your collaborators in your value chain have workforce issues, those are also your issues. In the context of this interconnectedness, I want to acknowledge that the work we do takes place on the ancestral land of the Adena culture, Hopewell culture, and the Monongahela peoples, who were later joined by refugees of other tribes. Sound. Gotcha. If that continues to be an issue, let me know, and I'll see if I can readjust. And those, they were later joined. Oh, my mic. Shucks. All right. Well, let's see if this goes a little bit better. Test 1, 2, 3. There we go. Things you find out afterward. Hopefully this is a bit, but with that, moving right along. Joined by refugees from a number of other tribes driven from their homelands by colonizers. So we honor these traditional native inhabitants of this place and uplift their historic, unique, and enduring relationship with this land, which is their ancestral territory. We pay our respects to their elders, their past, present, and future people, community, and culture. So while we cannot change the past, we know that it has shaped the climate crisis and a number of others that we face today, and we commit to continued gratitude for the gifts of nature, along with respect, care, and stewardship of the land, each other, and future generations. So if you're interested in furthering your relationship with local Native people, we encourage you to join us at the week-long Indigenous Cultural Festival happening at the university beginning September 19th, next Monday. And on the note of stewarding each other, please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know what challenges or victories you are having making your workplace equitable and inclusive. As we move through the conversation, please use the Q&A function to ask questions, as we'll be prioritizing and pulling from that function for the questions rather than the chat. It's just easier to mine from, easier to make sure that we capture everybody and get all the answers out there. So now to the topic, why workforce fairness? Coming out of our Sustainable Business Forum in the spring, the Great Reshuffle, the worker of the future today, we are left with ongoing conversations around the gaps between the equity and inclusion policies of companies and the lived experiences of the workforce. And we have the goal of creating thriving workplaces for all. So there's a gap that we're trying to close in this conversation. With that, I'm excited to bring the conversation to our panelists. Their bios are available in the event description, so we won't waste our brief time together. With that now, I would like to dive into our first question, though. So let's start with academic baselining. So Carrie Leana is the George H. Love Professor of Organizations and Management at the University of Pittsburgh. So Professor, your research is on the impact of working under financial duress, right? So what is the business case for facilitating a fair and thriving workplace? Why should companies care?
Okay, great. Thank you, Chris. I'm Carrie Leana, and I'm happy to be here today. Thanks for inviting me. One of the things I study is financial precarity, and what I mean by that is when people are persistently worried about money, worried about paying the bills. And most of the discussions about the role of employers in ensuring employee financial well-being, it's often framed as a moral issue under the banner of ESG. We frame it a little differently. We frame it as an economic issue. And what I mean by that is we ask the question, do employers receive any gains from ensuring the financial well-being of their employees? And our research suggests that they do. I and my colleagues have conducted studies with thousands of employees across different jobs and different income strata. And what we consistently find is that when employees are worried about paying the bills, not only do they suffer costs in the form of poorer health and lower levels of happiness and decrements to their cognitive functioning, but these costs are also borne by the employers who pay the price through the, quote, cognitive tax that financial precarity imposes on their employees. And let me give you a couple of examples. That when people are worried about money, when they're worried about paying the bills, they don't have as much cognitive bandwidth left over for other concerns and tasks. And that includes their tasks at work. We did a study for truck drivers, for example, and I want to note that these are middle-class jobs. The average pay was $60,000, $70,000 a year. Those that were worried about money were significantly more likely to be involved in preventable accidents. And that's after controlling for a whole host of other factors like their previous driving performance, their general conscientiousness, all kinds of things that you can think of. And we replicated this in an experimental driving simulation, found the same thing. In another study we did with nursing aides, what we were focused on there was empathy with patients. And what we find is that that's a very strong predictor of attention to patient safety. But this otherwise strong positive relationship between empathy and safety goes away when the aides are worried about paying the bills, when they're financially precarious. And we find the same thing even for college students. SAT scores are a pretty good predictor of first-year grades. They get a bad rap, but they're actually quite a good predictor of first-year grades. But again, this strong positive relationship goes away for kids that are worried about paying for college. So the punchline here is when people are worried about their financial situation, it undermines their cognitive functioning, their emotional well-being, their health, and their work performance. These are all costs to the individuals and their families and their communities, but they're also costs to employers. And what happens is the disadvantaged are likely to become further disadvantaged, not because of a lack of motivation, but rather because their financial worry gets in the way of them doing their jobs. So the argument here, and I think we have a pretty compelling set of studies that show that it's really in businesses' self-interest to address widespread financial precarity because one, it interferes with job performance, and two, financial precarity has a negative impact on health, which can impose further costs to employers. I'll stop there, and we can talk more about that depending on people's interests.
Perfect. Thanks, Professor. All right, so looking to bring in our next panelist. So I'd like to move to Erin Hudson, the director at the Corporate Affairs Department at the Laborers International Union of North America. So Erin, a lot of your members are involved in the energy sector. How are you seeing things like the net zero commitments working with or in opposition to diversity, equity, and inclusion or other fair workplace initiatives? How is that energy transition related to workforce equity?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, it's great to meet everyone. Just a little bit more about me. I work for the Laborers International Union of North America. We're a construction union. We have about 500,000 members across the US and Canada. In the Pittsburgh region, just to make it real local, our members spent the last decade building out pipelines for all that Marcellus shale that was going to reach the rest of the country and provide low-cost gas. We've also had members who've worked in coal-fired power plants for decades, in nuclear plants across PA. So really, if you thought about that 500,000 members, about a third of our members are concentrated in the energy sector. And so the challenge facing us right now is many of the corporate commitments to net zero is causing a surge in renewable energy across the country. And we're trying to fight to make sure those jobs are as good as the jobs that we are transitioning away from. And so my role at the union is kind of unique, and I direct our responsible investment program. We've got about 45 billion in pension assets. Of those pension assets that are out invested in the market, we're a diversified investor across public equities, private equity, infrastructure funds. And so my job is to push our investment managers to make sure that this transition is happening in a way that doesn't just lean into net zero, but leans in equally hard in ensuring that these are good jobs. And so I'm happy to talk with folks about how we're approaching that with the companies we invest in, and then also how it's playing out on the ground. One thing that is promising to me is we're starting to see a divergence in best practices where we can now kind of point to, here's the 2 or 3 things that companies that are committed both to climate and good jobs are doing, where it's gone beyond some sort of corporate policy on ESG to implementing that in a business practice. And so I'm excited to talk about those today because I think we've got enough experience under our belt to know the difference now between a net zero commitment that will lead to good climate goals but bad jobs compared to companies that are doing it the right way. I'm excited to address that, and how you handle DEI on the project level is one of those best practices that we can now point to compared to companies who are doing it the wrong way. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no worries there. And I know that we're going to get far more into the economics and the market case on that one, but first would love to bring up Derrick, our final panelist. So Derrick Shoffner is the Senior Director of Programs and Services at Vibrant Pittsburgh. So getting very local here into the region and the area. So Derrick, could you tell us a little bit about how Vibrant Pittsburgh approaches these conversations with your member companies as they are embarking on their workplace equity goals and measurements? So where are they often stumbling in turning that kind of the rhetoric of the goal into action, and why are they often stumbling?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris, and happy to be part of this panel as well to talk all things sustainability, and the overarching through the lens of Vibrant Pittsburgh is creating sustainable workplaces, foster sustainable employees. So it's more of a collective effort here. So as Chris mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Services at Vibrant Pittsburgh. Our mission and North Star is creating diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplaces. So we're in the space of workplace development as opposed to workforce development. In terms of scaling and training workforces, we want to foster that within the workplaces. We think setting the scene in terms of like an inclusive and diverse and equitable environment within your workspace lends itself very useful to recruiting and attracting diverse talent throughout our Western Pennsylvania region. So the challenges are, within DEI work, there's no one size fits all approach to your kind of operation and the way you're sophisticating your efforts. But largely a lot of organizations gets hung up and like stumbled upon where to start. There's so many places and spaces to start. And as mentioned, each organization has their own kind of area and in terms of action steps and places to do so. It's important and key to identify where that lies to then set the scene as to that next steps to follow. So initially, the best place to start is via auditing. Determining where that may be, whether it's a pulse survey, auditing your policies. I mean, there's a number of different ways and like areas in which you can do so. And that's setting the tone as to the work and the action steps to follow there. So hopefully that provides some context to open the conversation more broadly of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Derrick. I know that one tool a number of our members use to audit their culture, audit their workplace, to figure out about the workforce is the Great Place to Work assessments. I'm sure there'll be lots of other assessments that we'll discuss over the course of the conversation today. With that, we'd love to bring all of our panelists together. We have a couple of questions that, based on our initial conversation that we had together, that seemed like these might be the initial good ones for us to start with. And I have already started to see a couple of questions come into the Q&A, so I would encourage for folks to keep sending those in there as the questions come to you, so you aren't trying to frantically write it down at the end in the deluge that comes toward the end of the program. So first up, according to the Pew Research Institute, 1 in 5 Americans are reporting that they are either very or somewhat likely to search for a new role here in the next 6 months. So, with many people and referring to this continually as the Great Resignation or the Great Reshuffle, what tools can businesses use to improve both employee retention, retaining the talent they have, as well as doing that in an authentic way. So I don't know if anybody has any initial thoughts on that. Derrick, you want to go ahead?
I can jump here initially with some tangible and practical ways of doing so. The first of which is initially, as I've kind of alluded to already, is auditing. Internally, the climate of your respective organization. That's going to lend itself very nicely as to reasons in which people would leave, so that you can address those things to retain those respective employees. Additionally, would be a stay interview. Everyone interviews talent as they're leaving and going out of the door. It's important, and it would be useful to capture that information on an annual basis of, Chris, you work for us, why are you still here? Of course, authentically understanding and gathering why people are staying, and then also checking in on the pulse of, well, what would make you leave? It's better to have that conversation with you in the contemplation stage, as opposed to when you're packing up your desk as to leaving at that point in time. So if it is paid, we'll rework the budget. If it is, you need flexible working options to work from home, we'll adjust your schedule. If it is, you need better healthcare, we'll figure a way out to make that happen, because you're a talented person, Chris. We want to keep you at our organization. So those are two tangible things to continue to retain talent and further amplify the voice, frankly, as well, of the internal staff that you have, so that they feel heard. It's incumbent upon organizations to then act.
Perfect. And we did not practice that one at all, but I'm just going to give a +1 for that, because that was those strategies are ones that came up in the spring in our Sustainable Business Forum. So those are ones that we are seeing actively utilized by member companies out in the field. I thought I saw Aaron. I saw you or Carrie want to chime in too.
I can just jump in on the net zero commitments, I think one thing that companies can do is really look at their procurement documents when they're going out to buy power. And so in the US, utilities and the corporate buyers are really driving these big projects that are being built. And that bifurcation between projects is really occurring at two linchpin points. It's the request for proposal that goes out to the market. For regulated utilities, it's usually regulated by their state regulator. And then the corporate buyers are just going out and competing against other corporate buyers. But that initial procurement document is a statement of values. And what we've seen is some companies are putting in that statement of values around their power buys for big wind and solar purchases, things other than the lowest megawatt price. And so I would point out the Salesforce more than a megawatt white paper, where Salesforce in their big power buys are putting in other factors that will weight a developer's chances of success when they are bidding in to, produce wind or solar. On the regulated utility side, Xcel Energy, which is a multi-state regulated electric utility headquartered in Minnesota, has also started putting in very strong labor standards. And if you want the backstory of how they were able to achieve that with regulators, we've got a couple case studies written up. But I would say if you are leaning into net zero and also want to lean into those jobs being as high quality as the ones that we're losing in the natural gas and coal sectors, looking at your procurement documents is a great place to start.
Perfect. And I'll do another little nudge for questions. I see more and more of them coming in, so folks keep adding those in. Carrie, it looked like you might have also been looking to lean in to add to that last point, or?
Yeah, I think the first two speakers really made a lot of good points that I don't need to reiterate here. The only thing I will say, though, is that, one of the sectors I study is healthcare, and, they are having massive shortages of people in nursing jobs and below. And as one of the people that runs the ER is in my class at one of the big hospitals, and he said that they're losing people to Sheetz, they're losing people to McDonald's, so there is kind of a basic wage issue here as well.
Perfect. And that does tee us up, I think, maybe to one of our last ones here internally that we might address before flipping to some of these questions that we're getting from the audience. So, Carrie, might stick with you and then go to our other two panelists. So thinking of it from a financing perspective, right? So Aaron did a really good job of bringing like, hey, there are other functions involved here in this conversation beyond just a people operations, beyond just human resources department, right? It's not the people leader, right? Like some of the conversations that Derrick was talking about, it's also like, what are all these other roles of functions like finance, right? I'm thinking about how we're doing the budget for things. So a lot of the conversations here over 2022 around this topic have been, you relate closely to often recent calls to raise a federal minimum wage as one among many strategies, right? So if that wage floor is below what the livable rate in wherever that company is employing talent, how can businesses remain competitive as a business, right? While improving both the retention efforts of keeping the people who are already there and looking to bring on new people. So I don't know if you had anything from your work with the different companies around how they looked at redoing their budget in order to stay competitive and to attract and retain the talent.
We have a peculiar system in the United States, and there's a variety of historic reasons for that, but the current system in the US places considerable responsibility for the financial welfare of society as a whole on the shoulders of employers. What would be great is to have better floors on things so that companies don't have to compete with one another on as much on things like wages, but we don't have that. So if financial precarity and retention and all the things, and DEI, all the things we're talking about here are going to get better, employers are going to, for better or worse, going to be the vehicles for making it better. And I think Aaron's examples are really good examples of that, and as well as Derrick's examples. So it really is on employers. I think there are tremendous costs to, that we know the benefits to that system, but there's also tremendous costs to employers for where we are right now. I don't think there's going to be much movement on that at the federal level. You see it at the state and local level a little bit. But I think kind of this idea that, the problem is costs go into the financial statements, that the costs of better benefits or higher pay, et cetera, and those costs are incurred immediately. That the benefits of paying people better, giving them more security, et cetera, are more longer term. So for companies to incur those costs, that they have to take a longer view on things. I think that the current great resignation, whatever people call it, is kind of the chickens coming home to roost on that short-termism, that short-term thinking in some ways, that I can go somewhere else and get a 10% bump in pay. At least I'm keeping up with inflation, which my current employer didn't seem too concerned about.
So these are very much reminiscent of all conversations around fair pay, around wage compression, right? Things that I think many companies out there are struggling or facing. Derrick or Aaron, didn't know if either of you wanted to chime in there about that idea around, hey, from a business case, how to remain competitive while trying to raise, at the very least, things around salary or broader compensation.
Yeah, I can say on the renewables, that's the number one issue we face. If you're asking a developer who is bidding into a competitive bid situation to add, let's just say they're doing a 100 megawatt project, they want to add healthcare, ensure the workers have healthcare, and that's going to raise the price of the megawatt 2 cents. They're not going to want to do it unless everyone else is. And so our solution so far has been to try to legislate it, which we were somewhat successful in the recent Inflation Reduction Act, which includes now a federal wage standard for renewable energy projects that is going to put developers on equal footing when they have to compete. Because what I think the point of unions in some ways to take price out of competition, or take wages out of competition, right? You want people to be able to make that choice without being hammered in the market. So far, it's been very difficult to ask one company to do it unless they're all equally treated. And so, through this recent Inflation Reduction Act, we have gotten a wage floor that's going to apply nationally. And now we're going to see how that rolls out. And does that help people make these choices in a more reasonable way from a business case, where you can now justify leaning in on climate and leaning in on good jobs because it's not going to harm you compared to your competitor.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. Go ahead, Derrick.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here as well. And Carrie alluded to, frankly, that at the end of the day, the business is going to have to pay in some kind of capacity, whether that is from a compensatory standpoint or offering on like a couple of things that I'm going to mention here. So of course, and Aaron's alluded to this as well, is beefing up your benefits, however that may be. If you can't pay your staff more from a salary standpoint, get creative in other ways in which that you can reward them, but also attract them to further position your organization. So whether that's access to childcare, anyone with a kid knows that you're bringing out an extra mortgage to pay for daycare services for your child, whether that's providing that on site, if that fits into your respective business model, or additionally, it's work schedule, shifting to a 4-day work schedule if that fits within your model as well, to allow for independent contracting and opportunities for your respective employees. I also used to be in that model as well, 4-day work weeks, and then the other days in which I'm not working, it's independent time for me to earn as an independent contractor, which directly the organization isn't paying for as well. Health and wellness services, benefits, in addition to healthcare, all of those are further ways in which you can position your respective organization to be more attractive, in addition to like the ways in which people are working. Hybrid spaces, remote work is becoming more attractive. While it's not the absolute standard of practice at this point in time, it is a pretty good best practice, to establish the ability for your staff and your workforce to work remotely. Again, if it fits into the model of business in which you're operating there. So just a couple of ways there.
Can I say one last thing, just to put a pin on some of the things that have been said here, that what I find hopeful is I think we had a lot of time, we've had a lot of time where there was kind of a race to the bottom in terms of seeing how little we could give employees. And what I'm seeing is the beginning of a change on that to hopefully a race to the top on this in terms of how we can attract employees and retain employees.
Very, very much so. That's part of the aspirations that we're seeing as well. So that does bring us a little bit transition here to some of our questions, both submitted now and in advance of the event from the audience. When looking at, and thank you, Aaron, I saw you were able to help answer one. So great, good panel. So one of our questions from Josephine was, when assessing the Great Reshuffle, are companies looking at the ratio between their highest paid and their lowest paid employees? So I can give a little bit of framing up front, because I know that we addressed this a little bit in the Sustainable Business Forum in the spring. So Josephine, if you want, you should be able to find that from our website. Most of those resources should be available. I'd encourage you to check out, in particular, pardon the emergency services going by, we encourage you to check out resources such as ESGX. That's a YouTube channel put together by HIP Investor and another partner organization. They put together a lot of really great work on that annually. As You Sow is another organization that puts together research on that front as well, and you'll find briefings from them. But for the panel, I don't know if any of you all have any insights as to experiences with companies really looking at that comparison, and let alone looking at it, but also perhaps doing something with it.
I would say no. And I hope my colleagues here on the panel are going to be more optimistic than I am. But if you're talking about raising kind of the lowest paid employee by a couple of dollars an hour, which is not trivial, I mean, that makes a significant difference in people's lives. But to reduce that ratio between the top and the bottom, the person at the top is making so much money that I don't think it does it much for that ratio. It doesn't say it's not a good thing to do, to raise those people at the bottom, but I don't think it really has much of an impact on these differentials.
I'll say, I think the laborer, which is the union I work for, is the lowest paid individual on a construction site. And every construction job is temporary because you are going to go from one temporary project to the next. So in some ways, our industry is always used to this constant reshuffle. You're building a school, you're leaving, then you're building a hospital, then you're going to go build a solar farm, then you're going to go build a pipeline. So I think what I've noticed instead between the bifurcation between maybe employees within the same company is whether or not people are deciding to stay in our industry, because other industries some industries have become, I think, more attractive. And so for us, it's more what you see is for the companies that are paying really low wages, $17, $18 an hour for a construction laborer, those people are now deciding, would I rather stay in construction and work outside in the heat and the cold, or be in retail or be at fast food who've had to bring their wages up? And so that's the reshuffling we're seeing, is low wage workers, if they're not organized, deciding which industry to move in, because some industries have been forced to bring their wages up. So I haven't seen the reshuffle from top to bottom, but more industry sideways.
Yeah, and Aaron brings up a great point that I was going to mention, and Carrie also kind of reiterates my attitude towards this as well. It would be a good best practice to assess this in terms of, from a people analytics standpoint, as to who's moving and at what rate and why. But I wouldn't say it's being universally applied within organizations. And those that are applying this have thriving workforces, frankly. They're retaining their staff, and people want to work for those places. So it's not surprising by any measure, as to exploration of there being a relationship of why people are leaving, and then eradicating that and addressing them. So I have no new information on my part, really more of just like a reiteration of it. It should be, common practice for organizations to do such.
Awesome. Thank you, y'all. And more questions keep coming in. So this one from Silo. So thank you, Silo, for attending and asking. So from hiring to retaining companies, companies have always looked at profitability and revenue generation. Let's see. So how important is it for companies to look at profitability, or how much importance should they give to making any and all of these workplace efforts or initiatives when deciding to take on different sustainability efforts? Like, at the end of the day, is the metric that they keep looking at, like, hey, is it generating NPV? Is it the top line? Is it the bottom line? What is the kind of metric that you all see that companies are often really assessing these initiatives against?
I can, for companies that are making an effort around purchasing renewable power as just an example of a sustainability effort, I would once again bifurcate it into the regulated utilities. The ones that have been successful in making the case that they should do this really have, one of their secrets to success is really getting their regulator on board so they can ensure cost recovery passed into rates. And so I would say, if you were looking at that best practices list, the companies that on the regulated utility side that seem to have found the sweet spot of like how to do this in a good way have thought exactly through with their regulator, if we want to do this in a way that meets our shareholders' objectives, our duty to provide power at a low cost to customers and create good jobs, will you support us in this effort? They're further along because they've really laid the groundwork with all their stakeholders instead of just trying to go out and do it themselves without really laying that groundwork. So I would say that on the regulated utility side. And then on the non-regulated side, with just like corporate purchasers, I think, once again, kind of taking time to really understand the stakeholders you could talk to get a sense of, at least on the labor side, I think we're 8% of the price of building a utility scale solar farm. And so there's a lot of other variables that could make or break your project, your siting, your interconnection, your profit margin your contractor wants. And so instead of having a knee-jerk reaction, the companies that have figured out the way to do it are often looking at this as one variable among a lot of others that they can control, and then having a thoughtful conversation about trade-offs that they're willing to make. So that's also a best practice on that side. But I don't think any of them are doing it from a altruistic perspective. All of them are doing it with a profit motive. It's just maybe the time and effort they're putting into the groundwork.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. All All right, and I think I had another question come in here. Aaron, this one looks like it might be sticking with you. So thinking about, from the international angle of things, right? It seems very normal to us that companies would find, like we were just talking about, would find the most economical way to make things. And this often means that the manufacturing is moved to emerging markets, and we don't think much about that, that the people there are being paid less than they would be paid here if the manufacturing were here. Yet, when you think about some of the global companies that you work with, when it comes to companies move from other developed economies like Europe to the US, we've noticed that when we're on the receiving end, then often we take issue with, hey, why are we seeing these discrepancies in the treatment of the labor force, right? So, Aaron, where within that are you seeing companies really trip up? Is there anything kind of consistent across any of these global players that you're seeing that's often tripping up companies that others should be mindful of or take note of?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we in that same Inflation Reduction Act, we worked with a lot of the manufacturing unions to get give companies a domestic content bonus credit if, for example, they're using steel that was manufactured in PA. So that's just an example, because it's the same competitive factors at play in the global market that it's hard for one company to stick their head above others unless everyone's treated the same. And so I'd encourage you to look at the domestic content bonus credits that are available to companies if they commit to do projects that have some element of US manufacturing in it. And then I think you also saw that the issue of having low road suppliers in your supply chain basically shut the US solar industry down for 9 months in the spring, right? Because there was a tariff investigation looking into whether forced labor was being used on the solar panels. And we as a country, you couldn't import a panel into the US because people were worried about how they were going to get hit with these tariffs. And so a ton of companies lost a bunch of money because we had turned a blind eye, right, to the problem everyone knew was facing the industry. And now all of a sudden you're seeing a resurgence of all these companies announcing that they're going to start building solar panels in the US again, right? Because it was called out, companies lost a bunch of money, they finally had money at risk. And so now all of a sudden a bunch of big global actors have decided that, well, we actually need to produce solar panels here in the United States to meet our clean energy goals. So I think it took a crisis like that to have people not turn a blind eye. I don't know if that answered any questions at all, but that's just some quick takes.
Sure, and I think this particular one was getting to maybe the journey that you've seen with large energy companies that may have been operating in Europe and started up operations in the U.S. and some of the labor issues that they stumbled on here in the U.S. And maybe in thinking about with an eye toward learning opportunities, because I realize we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure to wrap up with each of you on the learning points that people have been asking about. So Aaron, I don't know if there's, I think you and I talked about this in our initial conversation, right? Some of those companies around, hey, they had some stumbles, and now after a couple of conversations, they're learning and moving toward that just energy transition. So I didn't know if there was anything consistent you're seeing across companies around where they're stumbling, and what does it take to be moving in that direction toward landing it well by doing well by the workforce?
I really don't. I mean, a lot of the European-based renewable energy companies that have come to the U.S. are on the same learning curve as the U.S. companies. They've just said different things in Europe compared to what they've said here. So in Europe, they've said we're for the just transition. In the U.S., they haven't. And so now they're kind of on the equal. I don't think they're somehow they're not morally superior to our own companies here, because they really haven't committed to it in the U.S. any more than the existing companies here. They've just said it in their own countries and they haven't said it here. So we're kind of in the same we're in the same place with people who are owned by companies in Europe as we are as our own US ones.
Gotcha. So still a learning opportunity there. Derrick, kind of looking to you then, we talked a little bit about where companies are stumbling and how, what not to do, right? Or maybe what to do. Are there any other things that you're noticing around what companies can do to avoid stumbling in this effort to bring their goals into life and to have it be more than just rhetoric?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it all starts with leadership of organizations to commit, frankly, first and foremost. And with that doesn't imply that there won't be shortcomings, even when you're on a journey. Everyone's in a season of learning, specific to DEI and actually like in any kind of capacity. So to assume that you're just getting started and it's going to be like roses and running through like picking wildflowers to upscale and sophisticate your DEI work is naive. And frankly, that's in any kind of strategic planning. So it does take a commitment, but also some transparency and empathy on the part of leadership, staff, but also externally as well, to understand that there's going to be shortcomings, there's going to be missteps, there's going to be misguidance throughout the process. It's all showing grace to others to then improve as well. So that's a kind of like a all like large high level kind of like discussion of that, but just setting frankly expectations and commitment, it goes a long way in this whole journey here.
Awesome. Thank you, Derrick. And Carrie, closing up on your side. So what can hiring managers do to not stumble when they're looking at how to pay for retention or how to pay for new recruits, right? We talked a little bit about the business case. So like, what are some of the tactical things that you've seen managers at the different companies that you've looked at? What have they done that others might learn from?
I don't think, I kind of agree with Derrick, what he just said, that this is a higher level decision than hiring managers can make. So, I mean, one of the things maybe is if they're having difficulty and they're not getting the people they want for the jobs, trying to understand why and feed that information up the chain so that those decision makers who are making decisions about salaries, et cetera, can see what the cost is. If you're going to be a low payer or a low benefit provider in your industry, that there are benefits to that, to the bottom line, again, in the short term. But I think, again, the benefits to it are very salient to decision makers, and the costs are not as salient. So the extent to these hiring managers can make those costs salient, that we're not getting the people we need. We're not getting as many of them as we would like to have. Our turnover rates are going up relative to our competitors, et cetera. I mean, that, again, these hiring managers aren't making decisions on what our pay rates are, I don't think.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. All right, so lightning round for the panel. I think we've exhausted the questions that have come in from both before and during. If I missed any, by all means, if we didn't cover them categorically, by all means, folks, please do email. I'm more than happy to shop them around, see what insights we can provide for folks. But I wonder if we can do one more quick, brief lightning round around among the panel on just what's your call to action, right? So whether that's whatever functional, if you were to call out one function or one level or one title, within companies or just companies on a whole, right? What should people be doing to really take action on some of the conversations that we've had today?
I can jump in here. I think the first call to action on my part from a workplace DEI standpoint is to audit. internally the practices and the structure of your respective organization, which implies, I'm gonna heighten Vibrant Pittsburgh here, but we have the Vibrant Index, which assesses an organization's workplace and culture, starting with leadership all the way to the way in which respective organizations are engaging with communities and everything in between: policy, procedure, data analytics, all of those kind of things, what you're measuring. All of those things are important because it's been important to make informed decisions. Just as important as like creating action and like addressing the things that are problematic, just as important is not messing up the things that are currently going well for your organization. If you've cornered the market in a respective space to heighten and make your respective organization even more attractive, why burn that down? Stick with that and address the areas in which need to be addressed. So it all starts with intentional action steps surrounding auditing your respective organization.
I'd say lean into good jobs as hard as you're leaning into climate, and start by looking at those RFPs that are going out from your organization on purchasing of renewable power. And if you need best practices, hit Chris up and I'll send him the companies that are already doing it.
And I can reiterate what Derrick and Aaron have said, and maybe add one more, and that is think about long-term rather than just short-term. That in the trucking company that we worked with, that again, sort of financial precarity was associated with more preventable accidents. You have one fatality in that preventable accident, it's millions and millions of dollars, because again, these were preventable. And so if you save money in the short end by not paying people as much or putting them in the situation where they never know when their schedule is, et cetera, you're going to pay down the road. So encouraging longer term thinking.
Awesome. Well, thank you, panel. Very much appreciated. And thank you, CSB team, for dropping all the links. And we will be doing a follow-up email where those links and other resources will be included in there. So if you registered, keep on the lookout for that. You'll receive a copy. It'll also go out in that newsletter that we mentioned as well. So keep an eye out for that. I will flag that a number of the companies that have been, or even if not named, been mentioned to, or tools that have mentioned to, a number of the member companies with the center are part of that experience set. So if you're wondering, hey, can I chat with somebody who's gone through this, or done something like this, or run into a brick wall, or found the way through the brick wall, over and around it, by all means, reach out. At the very least, happy to connect you with other decision makers, other peers in that space to help foster the conversation and help us all move forward. With that, I'll wrap this strategy primer up, and looking forward to seeing you all the next time around.